Next up, I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Thebe Ikalafeng, a trailblazing global African brand expert, Hall of Fame inductee, and a champion of a brand-led African renaissance. Celebrated as one of the 100 most influential and reputable Africans, he has transformed branding in Africa for over 30 years. He founded the Brand Leadership Group and Brand Africa, home to the definitive Brand Africa 100, Africa's Best Brand Initiative. Last but not least, I'm sure you've seen it, it's trending, the author of a bestseller, The Traveler, Crossing Borders and Connecting Africa. And through this book, Dr. Thebe Ikalafeng inspires through his journey of building brands and reimagining Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, please let's put our hands together for Dr. Thebe Ikalafeng.
Yo, 30 years makes me old. Now I'm about 10. But he's not lying about one thing, the best-selling book in the country. So let me tell you a little bit about the book. I don't do protocols. Everybody is observed who's here, and we welcome you. So let me tell you a little bit about the book. So I've been to 122 countries out of 195 in the world. Been to every country in Africa and every continent in the world. I've learned a few things about who we are, what makes us Africans, what binds us. I've learned how entrepreneurial we are. And I'll tell you a couple of stories. So I arrived at the border of Gambia and Senegal at about 3 in the morning. And I'm in a rented car and with the driver. So as we arrived there, the driver then, the border people say to us, you guys need insurance. I said, insurance at 3 a.m. I said, but we have insurance in our car. They're like, no, the insurance is for this side. You now need insurance to go to the other side. Now I'm sitting, I think, I can't get insurance at 3 a.m. Now some tout comes around, and the tout stops us, and he says, I can get you insurance. Now the South African in me says, Mbakalil, Mkokotel. So then we start, so we get into his car, or our car rather, we go to a place, we found people at a corner with torches, torching and writing insurances, whatever you call those things. And I'm looking at this and I say, oh, me the South African, I say, this is not gonna work. Because I know where this is going. Anyway, I need insurance to get across. But I tell you, afterwards I learned something from him. And he says, us here in Senegal, we know that there are people like you who are going to arrive here without insurances. So we pre-buy the policies so that when people come here at this hour, we are able to offer them. Because had it been in South Africa, they would have said, how can I come to work at 3 o'clock? Because I'm waiting for 8 or 9 o'clock in South Africa. But the one thing that you'll find in our continent is that people are much more entrepreneurial. I mean, I advised several presidents in our continent, as many of you know, and I was in one country and I said to the president, I said, President, we need to write a list, the percentage of unemployment, so that when you come into your term, you can measure how far you go. The president says, Thebe, do you want me to lose the presidency? Because he knows, in many countries outside of South Africa, or rather the rest of the continent, unemployment is at 65% or so, particularly for people under the age of, for the youth under the age of 30. But the one thing that you'll find in those countries, they do not sit there and blame their governments. They go out into the streets and they make things happen. They go out into the streets and become true entrepreneurs. I arrived at the border, and the Ghanaian immigration guy says to me, why do you do this to us? I said, what do you mean? This was like 2013 or so, the xenophobic attacks. And I'm standing there and I said, how do I explain myself? Because in all the countries I've been to, I've arrived as a stranger and left as a friend. And I now have to explain how inhospitable we are, how un-African we've become as South Africans. So one of the challenges that I've seen as we travel is to try and understand, because people always ask me, what's the difference between countries and all those? So I arrived in Somalia, in Mogadishu. I wanted to go to Somalia, and a friend of mine in Namibia says to me, and I said, I think I'm going to go to Hargeisa, because Hargeisa is like you land in Cape Town before you come to Joburg. Because Hargeisa is like light, Somali light, and Mogadishu is bombs flying everywhere. And a friend of mine said, in Namibia, if you go to Hargeisa, I will not respect you. You must go to Mogadishu. So I arrive in Mogadishu. Then I'm in Mogadishu. On the left-hand side, buildings have been bombed. On the right-hand side, buildings are rising. And I said to my friend, how possible is this? He says, every time they bring us down, we rise faster on the other hand. Because in many countries, people are not defeated. And as we drive with my security, somebody comes to us and asks us for money, asks us for a cigarette. Well, I don't drink, smoke, or do lines, but my friend also doesn't. And he says, give me your number. So he sends him a number. Now, loose draw, cigarette. I think must be like, what, rand? I don't know. Smokers, please, give okay, 1 rand. I think maybe it's a rand or whatever. And he gives him the number. And I'm sitting and thinking, what did just happen here? He says, you see here in Somalia, here in Mogadishu, we use EVC. 90% of us don't use cash. Because what you get to find as you travel beyond our borders is that other countries have leapfrogged the challenges that we have. That's why in a country like Kenya, M-Pesa accounts for more than 60% of the GDP, or GDP, 6% of GDP goes through M-Pesa. Same in Zimbabwe as well. So I've learned a few things. I've learned, and people all ask me, so tell us your highlights about these countries. I said, maybe I'll give you 5 highlights to wrap up this part of my talk. I've learned something about in Ethiopia, which is about spirituality and identity. That is the one country that has its own language, own history, never been colonized, own food, own alphabet. Deeply spiritual, deeply different. I've learned something about faith in the countries. Nigeria and Ghana, 85% to 90% believe in God. I'm not saying they're going to heaven, I'm just saying. They say they believe in God. So ngicela ningahlanganisi izinto, 2 different things. But I know something about religion, that when they asked the man who ran out of a country with our money, Bushiri, when they asked him, why don't you go practice this religion of yours there in Malawi? He said, South Africans believe in miracles, Malawians believe in God. So you can see how important religion is in our continent and how different people see it. Of course, one of the delights of traveling the continent, for me, has always been the culture. I dress like they do in every country. I eat what they eat. Sometimes I find out afterwards that I didn't eat the right things. So I was in Equatorial Guinea. That's before the Twitter and the Instagram. That's before Balthazar. So I wish I was there when Balthazar was there. I probably would have eaten a lot more than what I'm going to eat. So I went to this restaurant and they fed me incredible stew. It was delightful. I ate the stew. And as I was eating, I said to the chef, Chef, what did I just have here? Chef says, I said, what am I having here? I said, because it's nice. The chef says, that's fresh meat. I said, I know it's fresh, or I hope it is. I mean, it's not a spaza shop running in one of our townships. I said, which one is it? He says, it's fresh meat. And I could see he's getting irritated. So I said, let me hold back. So as I leave the place and I look on the right-hand side, I see people chopping monkeys, roasting them, skinning them. I say to my driver, "Kwenzani apho?" I did that preparing fresh meat. I said, thank you, sir. It was lovely. Thank you so much. But I've learned something which I've tried to cover in this incredible, wonderful book, which has just been published 3 weeks ago. That, as James Michener said, if you hate the people, you hate the religion, you hate the food, you hate the culture, it's better to stay home. So part of how we are going to grow as people is to go beyond our borders, is to go beyond ourselves, is to go beyond our limitations. And I'm often asked, but how do you travel so easy? You are in and out of countries in every single week. I said, simple. I leave South Africa at the airport so that I enter every country with an open mind. And that's how you are going to grow as an individual person. So let me talk about entrepreneurship. I may know one or two things about entrepreneurship. I left corporate 25 years ago to go on my own. So let's talk about African entrepreneurs. So we know something about entrepreneurship, or we know something about Africa, South Africa and Africa, that 70% of the people who live in this continent are under the age of 30, and more than 50% of them do not have jobs. Most of them are educated, they've got degrees, they are unemployed, but they feel unheard. And that's why sometimes they go into the streets and they go to Kenya and they say to the government, you are not going to mortgage our future. Or they go into Tunisia and to Kenya and they say, they said during the Arab Spring, your government will come to an end. Or they will run here in South Africa, they say the fees must fall. Because these young ones, they are much more ungovernable than we were. Because they are unwilling to accept what we accepted in our times. I saw a beautiful poster in Kenya during the marches, and it said, we are not your ancestors, we will fuck you up. Quote, end quote. Just in case my mother is here somewhere. I learned a few things that by 2050, there'll be 2 billion of us. We know that is not a problem. Because if there's one thing we know, is how to make babies. If we are frustrated with our bosses, with our jobs, with our opportunities, babies has never been a problem for us. So we will reach that goal better than any other goal. So our good friend Wamkele Amene, who's the Secretary General for Intra-Africa, for EFCFTA, says by 2030, we'll go from trading with each other 15% to 50%. I asked Wamkele in a public forum like this, standing, I said, Wamkele, that's a pipe dream. We have taken so far to get here, and you are talking about we are going to go from 15 to 30 to 50%. It's never going to happen. But I actually want to withdraw that question, because I think it will happen. And I was saying to President of Zambia 2 days ago in Zambia, I said, you know what, Mr. President HH, it will happen if there is political will. Because our biggest problem, and what people don't trust in every country in the continent, is people called government. Because the people called government, they repeat the same speech every week and every meeting, but they never implement anything. And the people in government, as we know very well, as the study by Edelman has concluded, 59% of the Africans say we don't believe in government. They say we believe in business. In other words, they believe in the entrepreneurial spirit of the country to change, to make things happen. The job of government is quite simple. It is to create an enabling environment. And if government fails to do their job, we should do the job for them, and that's the job of us entrepreneurs. Because it is unacceptable that a continent like ours will import 43 billion of food while we have 65% arable land. If you drive around, I started on the board of WWF for 10 years, and every time we drive, I used to look at this place, I said, so much land, why are people hungry? The people should not be hungry, and we should not be importing food. If you go to a country like Uganda, they eat and grow, they grow and eat their own food. And that is the job that entrepreneurs should be doing. If you look at the quality of South Africa's entrepreneurship, the rankings, South Africa is the third lowest out of 49. We need to get our entrepreneurs to work, and that's why forums like this are important. If you look at the global innovation ranking, South Africa, Global Innovation Index, South Africa is number 69 out of 133. We can do better than that as a country. We can innovate better, we can be much more entrepreneurial. But the reason we are not is because we as a country invest less than, or rather, we as a continent invest less than 1% in R&D. And less than 2% of the intellectual property that's protected around the world is only 1.8% of the total IP in the world is African. If you go to America, they're 25-30%. They register everything. Tina, we always go around and say they stole my idea. It is not your idea until you have protected it. And you cannot innovate until you do research. So we need to invest in research, and we need to innovate, protect our ideas. That's why, for example, when rooibos, the French wanted to steal our rooibos, but we fought them for 3 years, and we got our rooibos back. The French wanted to steal, the Americans wanted to steal the coffee from the Ethiopians. They fought them for 3 years, and they got their coffee back. The Spanish wanted to steal Maxhosa socks, and I joined that fight, and we fought them for years because we cannot come and steal our Maxhosa-inspired socks in our own country. So the third part I want to talk to you about is about what if we were doing entrepreneurship properly. Let me tell you the problems that we're facing now and why we should do that properly, rather. So for the last 15 years, since 2010, I've been doing a study called Brand Africa, 100 Africa's Best Brands. And in that study, we have established this much. Only 20% of the brands that Africans admire are made in Africa. I think we needed to take out tissues and cry instead of clap hands. Because it means 80%, because if I can do an audit around the room here, we're going to have fake Louis Vuitton bags. We're going to have fake Gucci's. We're going to have real Gucci's. Most of us are going to have Balenciagas because that's what we pride ourselves in, because we reject everything that is made in Africa. So it is absolutely unacceptable that in the same study I established that 64% of South Africans particularly say we believe in South Africa, or we believe in Africa rather, but only 20% are willing to buy anything made in Africa. So which one is which? If you believe in the country, then you must invest in the country. Every time we come up with a good idea, we sell it. Whether the idea is called the SAB Miller, SAB, we sell it. Whether the idea is called multi-choice, we are selling it to the French. Because we have never ever been, as a people, understood why everybody else wants to buy us, but they keep in theirs, and we are always impoverished. And that is why we are constantly owing everybody. If you look at the debt of the continent, we are at $850 billion as a continent. We spend up to 65% of our GDP in paying interest just to service the debt. So in other words, the entire continent is mortgaged. South Africa is mortgaged. There's only three countries, Botswana, Eritrea, country about the third one, which have never gone to the IMF and to the World Bank to ask for money. But we are out there now, begging, borrowing, everybody to help us. If you look at the categories in the study that I've done, the categories of the areas where we are investing, or the brands that we say we love, the brands that we admire, African brands, they're in the categories of booze, money, and mobile. Get us drunk, let's talk, and let's have money. That's all we are creating. That's why you see we've got banks, we've got alcohol, and we've got money. That's about alcohol, money, and mobile. That's the areas where we are innovating. When you look at the international brands in the continent, which areas are they big in? They're big in the areas of automobile, technology, and fashion. And people say, yeah, but you know they've got a head start. How long are we going to complain about this head start? Because Singapore, when LK picked up Singapore in the 60s, in 30 years he transformed that economy. From $500, I think, per capita to $50,000 per capita. Because he did it on a couple of things, on meritocracy, most importantly. Because we don't do meritocracy, we do favoritism. It's your turn, it's our turn, ukutya. So, ufanongene manje. That's how we do things in our continent. It's not South Africa only, it's a continental illness. So if you look at where South Africa innovated the most, 64% of South Africa's best brands were created before independence. 81% of Kenya's best and Nigeria's brands were created after independence. What have we created since independence? 45% people on SASSA, 50% people unemployed under the age of 30. All we have done, we have created dependency and a lot of excuses. So that is why our hands right now are in the hands of entrepreneurs. Because as Professor Lumumba said, the problem with our continent is we're in the business of demonizing good people and canonizing thieves. Ali Mazrui said something beautiful about us. I'm not sure if it's beautiful. He said, the problem with Africa is we produce what we don't consume, and we consume what we don't produce. We produce what we don't consume, we export everything, and we consume what we don't produce. Our job is threefold. We need to stop begging, we need to stop blaming, we need to stop borrowing. We need to stop begging and going to the we are the worlds of the world, the WHO of the world, the United Nations of the world. When I land in the different countries, it's in Africa, it amazes me that the first sign of life is a UN aeroplane, a UN car. When is it going to be a UNA, United Nations of Africa? Because all it is just beggars, and that's all we have created. You look at the African Union, since 1963, which was formed 25 May 1963, more than 70% of its funding is non-African. The entire building was built by the Chinese. It's got Chinese logos. How do you expect people like that to care for you? Because they can't care for themselves even. All they want to do is to go begging. Our job is to reduce the amount of begging that we do as Africans. Our job is to stop blaming other people for doing their job with their money. Stop blaming CNN for broadcasting negative stories about us. Start your own damn channel and tell positive stories about Africa. The Arabs did it with Al Jazeera. The Russians did it with RCT. The Chinese did it with CCN because they realized that, as Chinua Achebe said, until the lion learns how to tell its own story, tales of the hunter will always be glorified. So right now, the hunters are busy telling stories about their great hunts of Africa, and we are blaming them and looking at them as victims. We need to stop borrowing. I've told you the indebtedness of this continent. It is absolutely not acceptable. As Dr. Amos Wilson said, you cannot, as Africans, consume yourself to equality. We need to start creating if we are going to compete. And that is why the entrepreneurs are so important. And that is why Bulelani has been out for the last 15 so years in the townships everywhere else. He is not getting the same level of support that somebody from Europe comes and sets up a mining in Thebe in Africa, and us people in South Africa, the governments, run there and pay millions of dollars. But if Bulelani asks for just R1 million rent, we tell them about how tight the budgets are. Our job is quite simple. Our job is quite simple. Our job is quite simple. We need to move from aid to trade, and from trading to brands. You know, I facilitated a panel about 10 years ago with ministers from South Africa, from China, from everywhere else. And we sat on the panel, and South African ministers were launching their 100 industrialists in 3 years. That was 10, 15 years ago. They have yet to produce one industrialist. Because you don't produce industrialists with a blue paper and a white paper and meetings in parliament and speaking big English. You produce industry, you industrialize by enabling entrepreneurs to do what they do best, which is to create. This is how we're going to do it. First, as entrepreneurs, I want to give the message to entrepreneurs on how they are going to reclaim this future for themselves and wrestle it away from everybody else, because this is the African era, this is the African century, this is African day, and it will always be and has always been the African time. The first thing we're going to do, we are going to have to reclaim our identity and our culture. We are going to have to be very proud of where we come from. How beautiful is it that Maxhosa goes and opens a shop called Maxhosa Africa in New York? When Maxhosa came to see me, I've been with Maxhosa since the beginning, and when he came to see me, this week Maxhosa by Laduma, I said, Laduma, let's keep a low Laduma's Mars. Can we put Africa there? We took out, we did a few things, repositioned the brand took off. He said, why though? I said, because wherever you go in the world, when they see Maxhosa, they must understand the provenance, where Maxhosa comes from. Maxhosa come from Africa. And when you do that, you are elevating who we are. Afela Kuti said it well. They said to him, why do you name your children Yoruba names? He says, my children are not always going to live in Nigeria. My children are not always going to work in Nigeria. They're going to become stars elsewhere. They're going to do well elsewhere in the world. I want when Femi, anybody else does well in the world, when they get the glory, that glory goes back to Africa. It goes back to the Yoruba people of Nigeria. And that's why we ought to be proud about where we come from, our cultures and our identity. Because it is the one thing that distinguishes us. You know, they asked Esther Matlangu, I said, Mama, this thing that you do, lombalo wako, where does it come from? And I'm asking questions like white people ask, what inspires you? Esther says, there's nothing special about what I do, Mtanam. It's Ketu. This is who we are. So if we reach deep into our culture, we'll understand therein lies the creativity. We don't have to try and emulate the look like Gucci's and Balenciagas on the world, because we are much better than them. Our job is to assert ourselves like Maxhosa did, like Tsepo did, like everybody else, Batu did, and create the brands which speak our language, which come from our history, which are competing equally in the world. The second thing we need to do, we need to reclaim our narrative. And I said it earlier. You know, Africa No Filter just released a study 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they established that negative perceptions that are being propagated by CNN, by BBC, by Al Jazeera, by everybody else about Africa, cost the continent 3.2 billion pounds every year in increased interest payment on our sovereign debts. This is just a negative story. They're not saying the cost of servicing. They said that negative coverage of Africa is very costly. So now if we own our story like Chinua has asked us, we will be able to reduce the negative story. Because you know, people will always say to you, they asked me the other day, they said to me, you've been at this thing for years. They said, all we've known is you speaking and championing African. I said, we are going to champion it until our last day in the grave. That's how you got to appreciate the people of East Africa community, because what did they say? They said, we are going to make Kiswahili an official language. In South Africa, because I'm South African, I can speak about my country without fear or favor. And in South Africa, we've got 11 languages. But if you dare speak a whole speech in one of the other languages, they look you down. They look at you as if you're uneducated. They look at you as if you don't know what you're talking about. I love Botswana, next door where my grandfather comes from. Botswana, in a whole meeting yesterday, I don't know if you saw yesterday, the Minister of Finance did an entire speech in Setswana, in Parliament. Psh, try that in SA. Try that in SA. You will be ridiculed. You will be told how uneducated you are. You will be told how disrespectful you are. Is it disrespectful? I was in Rwanda for the Africa CEO Forum, and I asked the one guy, you probably see the story in the book as well. I asked the guy, I said, what is your name? And he gave me the story, his name's Jean-Pierre. I said, no, man, your name. He said, Jean-Pierre. I said, no, your name. You know, the one your mother calls you by when she really wants to deal with you. Then Then he gives me the name, some Kinyarwanda name. I said, but what does it mean? Then he tells me the story, what it means. I said, that's a beautiful story because our names have got history, they've got names, they've got roots. I said, why don't you go by that name? He says, because we want to make it easy for them. I said, who's them? The French. I said, wait, when you go to France, do they try and speak Kinyarwanda to you? He says, no, sir. I said, so why do you want to make it easy for them? They must also sit in a meeting in Rwanda with the Google and translate until they get it, if they don't want to learn the language. We must, the last point, you must reclaim our economies. We have to, and that's why the entrepreneurs are so important. You must love what the former President Masisi, among all his faults, he did one thing well. He told the Bears where to get off. When the Bears wanted to hold him to the same terms they've had pre-independence to now, he said the bus stops here. The Bears said, we've got the customers. Masisi said, we've got the diamonds. We will find customers. And they met each other in the point that works. The young men, I talked about, saw one of the banks is here, but I sat on the board of a bank for 15 years. And in that bank, the book is also written there, one young man came to me, says to me, none of the big four want to help me. I said, what do you want? He says, all I want a banking partner. I said, to do what? I said, he says, I've got this thing called Yoko. I said, Yoko? Come see me at home on a Sunday. It was a day before the board meeting. Come see me on Sunday. He came to see me on Sunday, presented to me this idea. I looked at this Yoko thing, and I said, yo, Katlego, this is unbelievable. Why are you struggling? He says, because they say I'm unproven, I don't have a record, and the guy is smart. I mean, Katlego Mapai is very smart. Ultimately, I took the idea. I said, send it to me, I'll put it on to the CEO. I did just that. The rest is history. I asked for nothing because you don't have to ask anything to lift everybody up. Part of reclaiming our economy is understanding what Nana Akufo-Addo understands in Ghana, that out of that Ghana and Ivory Coast account for over 80% of the cocoa, which is the main ingredient in the chocolate. But out of the $150 billion chocolate industry, Ghana only gets 1.5%. So you know this is trouble. Finally, I want to leave you with a small message. I've had this in my head since I discovered this quote. Unfortunately, it's not by an African, but nonetheless, the message is important. George Bernard Shaw said once, and because we can relate to it as Africans, township people, George Bernard Shaw said once, people like to blame their circumstances for where they are in life. But the people who get on are the people who create the circumstances they want, and they thrive. And FDR, in closing, put it probably better. Because, you are going to find a lot of people criticizing you as an entrepreneur. They are going to tell you your idea is useless, it's unviable, your idea is too complicated, you are too ambitious. But Nicola Klein, in the 30s, who was a unionist, said, first, they will laugh at you. Then they will ridicule you. Then they will begin to challenge your idea. Ultimately, they will build monuments to you. FDR, my final word, said, and it's a message to entrepreneurs. It is better to dare mighty things to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory or defeat. Congratulations on these incredible initiatives, and to the winners who are going to be recognized tonight, and buy the most important book about the continent.